Chapter 33, Abducted. The aerial bombardment of Iraq began on January 15, 1991. Ari wasn't surprised at the uncompromising stand taken by the U.S. president and his coalition partners in their pursuit of Kuwait's liberation. He was surprised, however, at the overwhelming superiority of American technology, resulting in such astonishingly few Allied losses. The allegedly invincible Republican Guard was pinned down and pulverized. Allied air power was making certain that the ground war, once it began, would produce a swift and stunning victory. Based upon inside information from the Post's Mossad connection, Ari had predicted in his column that Israel would not retaliate after Iraq's primitive Scud missiles began dropping hit or miss on Israeli civilians. The Butcher of Baghdad had invited Israel to dance, but she didn't like the tune. Her leaders were too clever to play into Saddam's hands. This was exactly the position Ari had taken months before, and for which he had been soundly taken to task by a number of readers, including members of the Knesset. Now he had been vindicated. Iraq's cold-blooded leader had threatened to, quote, burn Israel with chemicals, end quote. Thus, every Scud attack carried the potential of unleashing poison gas or biological warfare against defenseless civilians. It was a time of great trial for that beleaguered nation, especially since its vaunted military, which had always been swift to take revenge in the past, was not allowed to retaliate. Such inaction created a national sense of helplessness. Ari learned firsthand a further lesson in what it meant to live under the constant threat of a war of extermination against the tiny nation that had finally become his own. Miriam was now coming up from Tiberias each weekend. She and Ari spent every possible moment together. It seemed rather obvious to Yaakov and other relatives in Jerusalem, who saw little of Miriam on these regular visits, that something serious was brewing between these two. As for Ari and Miriam, neither of them was willing to think of their relationship as a romance. Not yet. We happen to have lots of common interests, Ari told Yaakov, and we find each other intellectually stimulating. No more than that, nodded the old man vigorously, pretending to be convinced. Right, we just enjoy one another's company. Yaakov smiled. So much that you can't get enough of it in a weekend? What's going to happen when school lets out for vacation? On weekdays, Ari began to walk each evening through that part of the Arab quarter where he had encountered Alor a few weeks previously. He would even buy a cup of orange juice from the same street vendor and stand nearby, drinking it slowly, warily, in the hope that this amazing person or entity, or whatever he was, might make another appearance. It would be most interesting to get Alor's views on the Gulf crisis, perhaps a fresh insight that he could even put in his column without, of course, divulging the source. Then one evening, about 3 weeks into the air war, it happened, but not in the way Ari had anticipated. He had just enjoyed the fresh squeezed orange juice to the last drop, thrown the empty cup into a trash barrel, and resumed his stroll along the narrow street, when a neatly groomed man came up and began walking alongside him. Turning in excitement, fully expecting to see Alor, Ari noted to his dismay that the man matching his stride was an Arab and wearing a keffiyeh and an obviously unfriendly expression. In that instant, he became aware that a second Arab had simultaneously come up close behind him. "Keep walking straight ahead," said the man beside him in a low, menacing voice. "My friend has a gun pointed at your heart." Ari obeyed, but slowed his pace to kill time, hoping for an Israeli patrol to appear. He had gone only a few paces, however, when the man behind him hissed, "To your left, quickly, into the shop." The door to the small souvenir shop, which had been closed, swung open at that moment. Better to resist out here in the street than inside. Ari turned his head slightly to see where to send his lethal feet, but the man with the gun behind him had cleverly pulled back out of kicking range. They're pros. They know exactly what they're doing. Reluctantly, Ari obeyed and entered. No sooner had he stepped inside with his two abductors behind him than the door was instantly shut and locked. "Keep going. Straight ahead." It was the first man who was giving the orders. In the semi-darkness of the dimly lit interior, Ari became aware that several other Arabs had been waiting inside. They fell in with Ari and his captors as they moved between two rows of merchandise toward the back of the long, narrow store. Through another door, they entered a low-ceilinged room in which Ari was ordered to sit on a lone wooden stool in the center while his captors gathered around him. He was blindfolded and, with a jerk, his hands were secured tightly behind his back with some kind of hard plastic that cut painfully into his wrists. I lost my only chance. No way now. Who are these guys? What do they want? We read your newspaper column. The words were spoken with evident sarcasm by someone standing directly in front of him. Again, it was the voice of the Arab who had first accosted him in the street and who seemed to be in charge. I'm glad you do, said Ari. I work hard writing it, so it's nice to know that I have some readers. A smashing blow to the head from behind rendered Ari senseless for a moment. He would have fallen from the stool had not strong hands supported him. We do the talking here, growled the voice in front of him. You answer only when you're told to. Understand? There was an ominous silence. Then the same voice continued. We don't like what you write. It's Israeli propaganda. Prejudiced. No sympathy for Arabs, especially Palestinians. I try to be objective, insisted Ari. Another blow, this one from the front, left his head spinning and his ears ringing and the taste of warm blood in his mouth. Let's finish him right now and be done with it, said someone to his right. Why waste time with this scum? A low murmur of heated conversation ensued. Even with his limited knowledge of Arabic, it became apparent to Ari that more than one of his captors were urging his immediate execution. Calm down, brothers, ordered the man in front, switching back to Hebrew. When we get through with him, he's going to be a big help. He's going to write for us, give his readers a new perspective on the Palestinian problem. You think the paper will print my column if it becomes a mouthpiece for the PLO? Demanded Ari. You're intelligent, educated, clever, came the quick response. You can make it subtle at first, okay? A little here, a little there, nothing too obvious. As a journalist, I write what I believe is true, interrupted Ari defiantly. Shut up! You'll write what we tell you to. You've got no choice. You're on the PLO's death list, and there's only one way to get out of here alive. We have guaranteed ways to persuade you. Better do it the easy way. It's not so messy. Agreed? Suppose I say, okay, you let me go, but I don't write what you want. What then? The whole Israeli army can't protect you. We'll get you, and when we do, you'll wish you'd never been born. So this was what it was like to face death. Nikki, and now it was his turn. At least hers had been instant. These monsters knew how to extract the last agony from their victims. And Miriam, just when they... Never mind. At least he'd go standing for his principles. He wished he'd done a better job of that in the past. But now, at least now, with great effort, Ari pulled himself upright on the stool. Go ahead, he said. Kill me. I won't be your mouthpiece. Oh, we wouldn't kill you. The voice was as smooth as oil. That would be too easy. We have other methods. Ari clamped his mouth shut. He would not say another word. There was no point in it. That was part of their game, to get him into some bargaining discussion and bit by bit bend his will. Never. You have a son in Paris, Ari Paul. He'll soon be a year old. Ari sank down in despair. My God, they mean it. If I had my hands free for 1 minute, I'd take some of them with me. We could have him here tomorrow. We have a little game we play. You watch and we torture. We have a soundproof room. Babies scream a lot. What do you say? A long, terrifying silence followed. Ari thought carefully. There was only one way to save his son. He would get these men so enraged that they would kill him right now. Then his son would no longer fulfill any purpose for them. I'll tell you what I say. Ari steeled himself. His hands were tied, but he had 2 free feet. You know what I think of monsters who would torture a baby? He jumped up from the stool, and his knee went instantly into the groin of the man in front of him. Swiftly, he lashed out with his other foot where he thought someone had been standing just behind him, but found only empty air. A blow from the side knocked him to the floor. A tremendous crash and a chorus of shouts seemed for the briefest of seconds to be ushering Ari into some otherworldly hall of fame. It wasn't his own heroics, however, as he immediately realized, that were precipitating this commotion. Stampeding boots, yelled commands, oaths, a brief scuffle, and it was all over. 4 strong hands lifted him to his feet and pulled the blindfold from his eyes. Ari looked around in astonishment. To his great relief, he saw a dozen Israelis in plain clothes with Uzis and now clearly in charge. The Arabs were on the floor with guns at their heads, being handcuffed, a look of stunned disbelief frozen on their faces. "You're a lucky man, Thalberg." The speaker was tucking a .22 caliber Beretta, the preferred weapon of Israel's Mossad, as Ari mentally noted, into his belt under his jacket. How did you find me?" gasped Ari. His head was aching, and he felt on the verge of losing consciousness. "We've been watching this place for weeks. It's a PLO safe house. Had it bugged. We just happened to be listening when they brought you in, or you would have been a dead man. You couldn't take them all on, blindfolded and hands tied. I'd rather die than make a deal like that. They would have tortured you first. You're a tough customer, but they would have had you screaming. I wanted them to kill me. Then my son wouldn't have been of any use to them." Already the commander was on his handheld radio. "We've got 6 of them. Thalberg's okay, but he's hurt. I want an ambulance outside the Damascus gate immediately. Out." The commander was clearly in a great hurry. "Okay, let's get these guys out of here. The back way. Schwartz and Lemke, pick 2 other men and stay behind. The next shift will come in the back door at 4 o'clock. They'll open the shop in the morning. I want everybody arrested who comes into this place. Customers, anybody, no exceptions for any reason." A man on each side supported Ari as they hurried to follow the commander of the unit out the back way. Following a narrow passageway between buildings, they arrived at the next street. 6 unmarked cars were waiting. "Not a word about this to anyone," cautioned the commander as he helped Ari into the back seat of one of the cars and climbed in beside him. "It never happened, okay? We're still working on the case. This isn't all of them, and we don't want any leaks." "Okay," said Ari, "but I'd sure like to thank you publicly. You guys deserve it. I owe you my life." "We're not in this for thanks, just survival."